All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started with the Complex Rehabilitation Technology and Wheelchair Repair Advisory Council meeting. I'm Jonathan Slipka. I'm one of the co-chairs of the group. This morning, we are going to have a discussion about um, the recommendations that were provided by the advocates this morning. The way that we're going to structure things over the course of the next two meetings, because we have a lot to get through. There'll be recommendations by the advocates. Next week, we anticipate recommendations by the industry that we will discuss. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through them one by one. We'll have someone from the advocacy group spearhead their side. We'll go one by one, and we're going to limit questions to 2 questions per person per recommendation. So that we can get through everything. By the end of next week's meeting, we need to have the full list of the recommendations that will end up going into the draft report. The other step that we will be taking after next week is we will be putting, similar to the way that we did things last year, we will put together a form, essentially a survey form that will be submitted that will have each recommendation listed, and for everyone to comment on it in terms of particularly for the state agencies, for example, if there's an agency impact, why they would not be in support of that particular recommendation, or if you would be in support of the recommendation, we'll have those options on the form, and your opportunity to comment any additional comments as well, to make sure that all of that information is included by the form, or from the form into the draft report. So before we get things started, I know Maureen is dialing in from home, so I'll turn things over to her. Go ahead, Maureen.
Hey, thank you all for coming. And just again, looking forward to the report. The chairs have come up with our 3 recommendations, and that really is just to get the interpretation of the laws on the 3 points. The big one is the 10-day requirement. What does that entail? The scooters, where are scooters covered and where are they not, if there's any section where they're not covered, and also the final report, is that Medicaid only or is it all for all users? And also that's our those are our recommendations. And also just a reminder that we have the second portion of the bill or the law going into effect in January, and that is with the insurance piece of it. So the private insurance that takes effect January. So we've come up with these recommendations based on all of this, based on the fact that we don't have an interpretation yet, and because we still are waiting for the bill to go fully, or the law rather, to go fully into effect. So having said that, I will take a motion to approve the minutes from the 10/22 meeting.
And also the November 19th meeting.
Yeah, but the 10/22, because we didn't vote on that, did we?
Correct. No, we did not. We tabled it.
Okay, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Okay. Ms. Johnson in the room has made the motion to approve. Is there a second?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Mahoney. Okay. All those in favor?
I have a proposed amendment to the minutes.
Okay.
In the last meeting, I believe it was NSM's report that said that their techs were receiving threats and harassment from consumers. But when she was asked to elaborate on that, Ms. Rassicott backed off of the word threats and said that the techs were receiving, what I understood to be, irritated, having conversations with irritated consumers regarding the law. And I feel like it should be reflected that the word threat was walked back.
It's harassment, not threat.
Okay, well, can we have a vote on the October minutes? All in favor? This is the November, correct?
That's in
No.
November, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Yep.
so,
Oh, I
we're
apologize.
good with, okay,
No, that's okay, Adam. That's okay. Thank you.
But I vote that's fine to go in as is, and I'm good with the minutes to vote approvals for
Okay.
both.
okay, so all in favor of October 22nd?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, and then, for the, November 19, we do have that change. Do we have any other amendments? Okay, so, all in favor of accepting these minutes?
Aye.
Or do we have a motion? I'm sorry. Do we have a motion to accept these minutes?
This is Farah. I will motion to move the minutes as amended.
Okay, thank you. Seconds.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so we will accept those minutes. So we'll get started with the recommendations by the council. And David, you have your hand up.
I do. I wanted to address something that was brought up last meeting in regards to voting. And I've been thinking about what Diane had said last week about how it would be unfair to vote on recommendations based on majority of the council members are consumer advocates, so she would be outvoted, and that assumption is incorrect because the legislator obviously knew what it was doing when it chose to give a majority of slots to consumer advocates such that they would have the votes on the council, knowing that typically in these committees there's an attempt at consensus, but if consensus does not work, then voting is the way things are resolved, and that the legislator intended majority voting on this committee is confirmed in the express authorization in the bill for majority voting for the chair and the co-chair of the council. It also makes complete sense that majority of voting slots would be given to the consumer advocates, given that the industry successfully lobbied to remove from the bill any enforcement mechanisms and to ensure that the council would have no teeth, since they were giving to a powerless council oversight of a bill for which there was no enforcement. It would make sense that at the very least they would want council recommendation to be based on majority vote whenever consensus couldn't be reached. So also the wheelchair repair task force is not a model for which should be done here, because that was created before any legislation with no teeth and no oversight with power was passed. Knowing that nobody to enforce the legislation, it would want consumer advocates to have a significant and majority voice, at least in recommending steps forward. So I believe that there should be discussion on all recommendations, and if there's no consensus on a given one, then a vote should be taken on it, and the report should indicate up front all recommendations which are majority vote in favor of them, followed by any other recommendations for there's no majority vote in favor. And if the chairs don't want to have such votes, then on that question, then per Robert's rules, we should put that to a vote as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I think the intent here is to have a discussion on each recommendation. All recommendations will will be put forward, and then ultimately what we would vote on, as we did last year, was moving a report forward that has all of the recommendations listed, as well as I mentioned earlier, with respect to the form that will be developed. All the recommendations would be put forward in the report with everyone's corresponding comments regarding those recommendations, but everything would be in one report going forward. So the intent of the next two meetings is to have a discussion on the recommendations that, again, the advocates wish to move forward, and then And then next week, the recommendations that the industry would like to move forward. There will be opportunity here this morning as well as next week to ask again questions on each recommendation to clarify those recommendations and put as much detail into them as possible to go into the report, flesh them out as much as possible. And then again, ultimately, everything would be in the report for the legislature to see with everyone's corresponding comments on the recommendations themselves. Maureen, I didn't know if you had anything to add to that.
No, I do not. I see, Sheldon, you have your hand up.
Yeah, what you just said, Jonathan, is not what David said. What David said is there should be specific individual voting on the recommendations, not what you're just saying is a big report that says a bunch of stuff in it, and you're following the task force model. And David just said, no, we shouldn't follow that model. This is a situation where the legislature knew what they were doing, and they chose to give a majority votes to consumer advocates. We should have voting on each recommendation, and the ones that are voted majority should be the council's recommendations up front. We should do all, as you said, any recommendations from anybody should be in the report, and any comments from any group should be in the report. Pro or against, it doesn't matter, but that's different from actually having recommendations voted upon, which are a majority vote. We need to have votes on each recommendation.
I can tell you in our discussions, Mr. Tappan, that at least from the state agency standpoint, that as of this morning, we would not be prepared to vote on anything. We can certainly have these next two meetings to discuss the recommendations, iron out questions, and potentially prepare a vote at a future point.
Well, I'm going to make a motion then. I mean, under Robert's Rules of Order, as I understand them, I'm going to make a motion that going forward, before the report is finalized, that there shall be a vote on each recommendation that's in it, and that the council report should first list all recommendations as to which there is majority vote before containing the other recommendations. I move that we have that rule as the basis for putting the report together.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
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 Okay. Any opposed?
I oppose, obviously.
Okay. Abstentions?
Department.
Yep, I'm abstaining from that.
I'm abstaining as well.
Of course, I'm abstaining.
I agree.
Did the motion pass? Okay, that motion passes.
Okay, Mr. Roop, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to let you guys know that we are limited with the two of the questions or comments, suggestions. I do have a couple conflicts today, so I believe all of us advocates we agree on the points that we want to share today. So just in case of my absence, if I do not return before the conclusion of the meeting, that we grant those two extra questions for someone else on a committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I am going to hand the floor over to the advocates to discuss their recommendations. Who is taking that on?
I'm just going to sort of be the MC. I only have a couple of things that I was going to mention. So I'll be, we amongst ourselves, we identified who's going to talk on each of these points. So the first one, these are the non-legislative recommendations. And this is like this is like the whole issue, right? Industry needs to hire more techs and call center staff so it can comply with the timeliness requirements. The first thing is pretty obvious, and Gary at the when we had the task force meetings acknowledged, Gary Gilberti, I guess he's not here today, acknowledged that the solution was more techs, that we could then timely can bring the times way down if we had sufficient techs. But the other thing in here is the call center staff, because what our folks are saying is that there's a real, there's a delay there. There's a real problem. And the call centers are, sometimes you're getting somebody in another country. That's the way the call centers are run. And they just don't seem to be able to follow up. So it seems that having enough staff there as well would be helpful. And that's why that recommendation is there. The next recommendation, non-legislative, was that DSS should notify all of its Medicaid members and then the dual eligibles known to use wheelchairs about the new wheelchair repair law and the option of filing a complaint with OHA. This was one of our recommendations, but at the last meeting, it sounded like DSS, from what you said, Ginny, was amenable to doing this and working with Adam from OHA and putting this together. Do we have that right?
Yes, we're gonna put this in a newsletter, the Husky newsletter. So it goes out to everyone, not just those impacted.
Is that electronic or?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe it is electronic.
Okay, so that's what that is. Then oh, by the way, I should ask the chairs. Should we stop after each one and then ask for questions? Like,
Yeah.
is that
Yes.
always-
Yes, I would say let's go one by one.
One by one. Okay, all right. So I should have said, are there questions with regard to that? The first one, which industry needs to hire more techs and call center staff so it can comply with timeless requirements.
I'm going to reserve my comments to the end.
Okay, Mr. Scott, thank you. I have, if nobody else does, I have two questions, Mr. Tubman. The first is, it seems like based on, well, one's a question, the other's a comment. The first is that it seems like we heard information at the last meeting that the industry is hiring more techs. Both companies spoke to that, I believe, last week. So that would be the first comment that I would make. The second is it in terms of detail, this seems like a very vague proposal. There's no sense in terms of numbers, what you're recommending in terms of the numbers that you think that they should hire. I mean, it's a recommendation that seems to lack detail to me. And so I just wondered if you all could speak to that in any way.
Those are both totally fair comments. The hiring of more staff is what was reported last time. The numbers is only slightly more than the staff that was reported during the task force meeting months ago. So although you're right, they both said they're hiring more, the total numbers was not really significantly different from what it was before. And you recall that the report, at least from New Motion, was that they're in compliant with the 10-day rule and the other things. It's only 60% of the time. So while they are hiring, there has to be sufficient staff, and it's not there yet. But to your second point, that it's vague, one of the things of the task force, and you were on that we talked about, is we don't really, it gets really difficult to specify a number, like how many. You should have 23 staff techs. It's really hard to do that, and I think the industry would really be opposed to that. In fact, they said they were opposed to it, and so we really can't. And so it's more, in a way, this is just a global recommendation to recognize that more staff is needed. And I don't think they disagreed with that. I don't think either reps from either of the companies disagreed with that. So that's why it's there, if that helps.
Okay, are there additional questions? Okay, seeing none. Please proceed, Mr. Tubman.
So the second one was one that Ginny and I just discussed that, it's going to be done. They're going to reach out through the newsletter. But I should have asked if there were questions.
Okay. Are there any questions with respect to number 2? Okay. Seeing none, please proceed, Mr. Tubman.
So the last one under non-legislative was that industry needs to adjust its scheduling procedures, including use of what's called routing software, so as to reasonably accommodate users' needs and ensure more timely community visits. And I believe David Morgana is going to speak on this one.
Yeah, so essentially what Sheldon just said, the routing software, and I brought this up back in the task force as well. What's happening is that out of efficiency, the companies have implemented routing software. And the routing software, what they do is they take all the appointments for the day and they put it into their, their system, and then they figure out the most efficient route for the, the tech as possible, which I understand why they're doing that. And it makes sense on some level, but the problem with it is it's that you're not taking into account the needs of the consumer. And when I say that, I mean, if you get a text the night before saying, hey, your appointment's at 9 o'clock in the morning, but you're a person who needs a PCA to get you up, and you're not up, and you're not able to, deal with that until like a certain time, or maybe you got kids in the house, or maybe you got a job and you don't get back until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but you could certainly be available at a different time. These things aren't being taken into account. And so unofficially, I know that New Motion has, kind of a thing where they might work with you, but it's not something that's widely implemented. And I don't think everyone necessarily knows that maybe they could call and maybe ask for an accommodation, but it certainly needs to be looked at. And again, I think it's for the good of everyone, because if you sit there and set up an appointment the night prior, because you don't get the text until the night before your appointment, and if it's at a time that doesn't work, then they got to cancel it. So then you gotta sit there and try to make another appointment, and say that next appointment is made, and you got to cancel that. And so it becomes this endless sort of trying to figure out when the best time works. So I just think for like long-term efficiency, it makes more sense to work more closely with the consumer the way it used to be done years ago before this routing software. That's it. Any questions?
Okay, I know Ms. Rascott said she's going to reserve all of her comments till the end, so we'll go to her.
Thank you.
Yep. So I mean,
Go ahead, sorry.
I have a question. I mean, again, this being a very vague recommendation, how would you recommend that this be done?
I would say that this cookie cutter approach to setting up appointments doesn't really take into account the consumer's needs as best as it could. So I think there needs to be a better way to account for people's needs. And again, they do that kind of unofficially and not inform everyone that that's a possibility. But, again, I get why they want to use it, because it's more efficient. They can fit more in. But like I said before, it doesn't take into account the consumer's needs. So, I mean, do I have the absolute perfect answer for this? No, but we need to work on it. We need to figure out a way forward to make it so that people aren't canceling appointments and prolonging the repairs.
So it seems to me, to your point, instead of making this a recommendation, that this is something that might be an item for further discussion of this group as we continue our work.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I mean, this is a problem, sitting there pushing it off, kicking the can doesn't really get it fixed.
If I may, I think that the idea was that acknowledge again some vagueness, but the point is to make it a priority, that it's a recommendation that this has to be dealt with, and then hopefully collaboratively David and others can work with the industry on how that could be done.
Right. I mean, in fairness, this is a non-legislative recommendation, so I do see that. So I mean, that seems to me that this is work that would that would fall absolutely under the purview of this group. Collaborative discussions and such in terms of how we can work to make that better. Are there any other questions or comments on that item? Okay, seeing none, please proceed, Mr. Tevin.
Thank you. Now we're moving on to the legislative recommendations, which is the bulk.
Can I, sorry, Sheldon, I would like to be able to do it in each section, my response, if I may.
Oh,
Of course, yes, I'm sorry, Ms. Rascott. Nope.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm assuming we're doing non-legislative, then legislative, and I was going to hold to the end to listen to everybody.
Yep, go ahead, please.
So a
Please.
couple of things to the points that you brought up, Chairman, that, the co-chairs, it is very vague on these things. My little bit of my frustration has been since the beginning of this, and I'm going to make a couple of comments, and then I'm going to have specific questions. Yes, the legislative comment I made is we weren't in agreement on how the legislative staffing was made up for this task force afterwards, but we had no voice in it. Once it was done, and we know the task force recommendations were all not done in this bill either. So I do have still I don't want to say bone of contention, but let's say for what it is, no matter what I say, I'm going to be outvoted for everything. And it's just it. And it's being put, no matter what we say, it's going to be forced out. So I want that on record. In regards to these non-legislative things that you have up here, we are already doing all these things for customer service. We're already hiring. We already had things in the chute before, even during the task force and going forward. And to my question I have on this, what is success? To the point you made, Sheldon, we're up each month. We've increased, and we added more admin, more part of our routing. Not everybody has software programs that are saying we can't dictate to a business what type of software program, to what David was bringing up. We have ours, but we're also doing hands manual because of this bill, even doing it to what the advocates enforced it as, what they interpret it as, regardless of what's happening. We've been doing this all along. And we continue to do it. In regards to notification, Sheldon, I told you before, but I didn't want to share during a meeting because unfortunately things that get shared in this meeting sometimes gets out in the public and it's misscrewed. We got notifications to the consumers. We've already had flyers drying off. We already have things that we're getting to our text to give out to the public. We're publishing those and getting ready to put those out. But a lot of this has not been a growth course of communication. It has been a dictation from the get-go. And we have been just listening and doing everything that's been asked of this council, regardless of the bill interpretation. And we keep doing it, and we keep doing it. But yet everything that's being put up on here is making it sound like we're not being cooperative. It has been the total opposite. And the times have improved all along. So my ask is going to be on this top part of to the point of staff hiring. If I'm hitting 85, 95% meeting compliance to the bill interpretation of the advocates, when is it successful? Because we can't say 100%, because life happens. If there's we got weather coming, if we have a tech, they get stuck in the snow, they miss the appointment, we're out of compliance. There's going to be things that were brought up. The same thing for the consumers. If they have something that comes up, it happens. We try to be flexible on things. My ask for this non-legislative point, since it is so vague, and we have been cooperating and have been doing all the things that's been asked without enforcement of a legislation, which we not even have the bill fully enacted yet you're asking for mandated changes. So I want that to be considered here. What is success? That's one of my questions.
I mean, if I can answer that, the law says this is what you have to do, and that sounds like 100%. The statement in his report from last time from Gary for new motion is they're off 40% of the time. That's not even close. You report 96%. Daryl's not here, but when Daryl speaks, he's going to. There's some information that maybe that data isn't quite accurate. So we'll get into that. But the point is that, I think the legislature meant, I can't say 100%, but the law says you have to do this. It doesn't allow any wiggle room. I mean, there is wiggle room. It says, waiting for parts, waiting for prior authorization, and if the consumer fails to make the wheelchair available, those are all, that's the wiggle room. Beyond that, there isn't any. So I think it's 100%. But in any event, we're not there, and the 96% may not be accurate. So I hope that answers your question.
Question does not, how can it not be accurate unless we give all the HIP information and we can show every single thing that's being tracked?
Well,
So I'm going to question that
yeah,
also.
when Daryl comes in, we'll have the example of that. Anyway, but the way it's written is so there can be compliance. That's what it says. 96% is not compliance. 60% obviously is not even close to compliance. On the other ones, the second one was only about DSS notification. It wasn't about there is something legislative on that, but this is only about DSS doing notification. And if DSS is agreeable to it, I'm not sure what your concern is with that one.
Oh, you brought it up in enough meetings. Would like me to go back and bring your quotes up, Sheldon? I mean, come on.
No, I'm saying this one is about
I know.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Tobin, if I may, I wanted to follow up on one of Ms. Rascott's questions. In one of our previous meetings, they introduced data regarding a national average. The national average they showed was 28 days. They showed that the state of Connecticut is down to 21 days. So my question is, where did the 10 days come from? If this kind of data was out there indicating that essentially nowhere in the country is 10 days being done. But the national average is 28 days. And they show data to show that Connecticut's already down. They are down. And I think it's just NSM. I don't want to speak for New Motion, but I think the data show that the NSM average was 28 days. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Rascott. 28 days. State of Connecticut's down to 21 days and continuing to trend downward. And so with that kind of information, I'm curious to where the 10 days comes from or came from in the original legislation. And if that's a number that we should consider reconsidering, given the information that we have.
I'm sorry, you're suggesting we should reconsider and have it be longer than 10 days?
I'm saying I'm saying it's something to consider potentially.
Let me respond here. The reason 28 days is terrible, 21 days is terrible. And the reason those are the national averages, these two companies dominate the whole industry nationally, and they're terrible in performance. Before these companies came to town, before these huge private equity owned national companies came to town, it was just a matter of days. Anybody who's been in a chair for a while in Connecticut can testify to that, and has testified to that before the task force, that it was just a matter of a few days. So 21 days is horrible. 28 days is terrible. 10 days is too long. And legislators said that when they adopted it. They said 10 days is too long. And I remember Senator Seminar saying, but we have to make compromises. So we're going with 10 days. The suggestion that we should increase it, I can't believe I just heard that from the chair of this council. That's my reaction to what I just heard.
I didn't suggest that we increase it. I suggest that it's a potential discussion point based on data we've been provided. I've made no suggestion of that kind, sir.
I don't think there's anything else to say about this. I mean, I can't speak for exactly where the 10 days came from. The legislature came up with it. Advocates said it was way too long. We asked for a much shorter period. And when it was going to be 10 days, we said it should be 10 calendar days. Instead, we got 10 business days, which is even longer. So what's in the law is problematic. And maybe the suggestion, which is not in here, maybe the suggestion is we should ask for shorter days, that 10 business days is way too long.
I would just want to remind the group that the 10 days by this interpretation does not include time for the prior auth and parts and everything. So we're not talking about 10 days. And I think we all know that, but just a reminder. David, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm a little shocked when I heard he's like he wants to look at the days. The amount of time that we have now is too long as it is. I mean, you got people literally stuck in their beds waiting for the chair parts to come in, and then we're even floating the possible idea in a vague way. Oh, we have to look at the amount of days. I would say it needs to be less days, but anyway, I was a little shocked when I heard that. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no additional questions, if you'd like to move on, Mr. Taubman.
The only thing is, Diane, did you have any comments to the C, which was the David talking about the scheduling procedures, routing software?
I can't comment to that because every company does it a little different way. We do manually, we do make adjustments if we know someone needs to change their time. So the flexibilities can be there and are there. And some of this is manually done right now because of those things. So we do track it. And I can show somewhere down the road exactly all the programming that goes into that if I need to for this task force, but I'm going to hold off on that until the need comes up.
Okay, thank you.
And I do want to make a comment though, Sheldon, to the comment you made about, I know you got a big bugaboo about PE-owned companies and that. What happened years ago, what is now, and the policy changes that have come in from the insurance plans and the policy changes that have come from CMS and the policies comes that from Medicaid office have changed over these years. And you have less and less suppliers doing this work. Most of the companies that we have and acquired that you go into have not been stock purchases that everyone thinks of what PE companies do. They have been acquisition of assets, meaning people can't do this business anymore and looking to downsize. And that has been ongoing, and we've stated that case, but I know it falls on deaf ears. I think you need to look at what's happening in the industry as a whole and look at what's also being happening in other states that are trying to address it and talk about what needs to be changed in the public policy from CMS on down. And I'm doing it on my end, but it's going to take a long time. And we do have a capacity issue. I wish there was more suppliers doing what we do in the business, but there's not. And there's a reason for it. And it's not just because of acquisitions.
If I can go on to the legislative recommendations.
Yes, please, Mr. Taubman.
So A and B are going to be done together because they're kind of closely related. Farrah's going to talk about them. A is the industry should be required to produce monthly compliance data to the council, and the industry should be required to produce compliance concerning non-Medicaid consumers, not just Medicaid consumers, acknowledging that both of the recording stopped.
Sorry about that, Mr. Taubman.
Okay, that this is being done. Diane explained that the reporting is actually being done now, essentially monthly, and including the non-Medicaid consumer data. But the recommendation is the law should be changed to actually required. Farrah?
Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here, even if only virtually. Yes, to legislative items points A and B, we are asking that both monthly reports and reports on non-Medicaid consumers be made, put into the legislation or into the bill or our recommendations. Not because that is not something that is already being done. As Sheldon pointed out, it is, and it has been spectacular. The more data that we as a council are able to collect, the better that we are able to help disabled folk, wheelchair users, and also the better that hopefully we're able to help serve and aid the industry in meeting their goals, the goals laid out in this bill. By making these items proper recommendations and getting them enshrined in law, it would make these requirements in place for, say, a time in the future if we had less, you know, helpful folks to work with, and just continue to help us have good quality data, which makes the world go round, just regardless. And I think that everyone benefits with more data. And since this is something that's already being done and the systems are already being put in place, I think this is a difficult one to argue with. I mean, who doesn't love data and spreadsheets, right? Questions, please. No, I sold it, huh? All right.
All right. Seeing no
Of course, Diane is reserving her comments to the end.
Of course.
If there aren't any others, then C is industry should be required to produce monthly data regarding staffing numbers based on a uniform definition of tech staff. And Joe's going to handle that one.
All right, so the number one ongoing issue we've been discussing here is there's simply not enough technicians at either MSM or Nemotion to provide timely repairs. We receive varying definitions of what a technician's job duties are and their numbers. So in order to be clear on the actual numbers of technicians, there needs to be a uniform definition in monthly staffing data. They're already sharing, you guys have already been sharing this information with us. And we have seen the correlation with the timely repairs and staff numbers. So we want to see that that continues to go in a positive direction. That's it for that one. The next one I'm going to be taking as well. I don't know. You want to read it?
I'll read it out since I've been doing the readings. I'll do the readings.
Mr. Tapman, very quickly. I don't see any questions. But I have a comment. Since down the road we are going to be discussing that form, in which we would like to, amongst this group, come up with a uniform definition of technician. It seems to me that before that recommendation could be put forward, it would behoove this group to develop that recommendation at some point.
Absolutely, yeah, because there needs to be a clear definition of what the technicians are. We've had varying numbers, we've had varying definitions, and I gotta say, Diane's been a lot more transparent about her numbers than Gary has, but we need to have a clear understanding across the board.
Okay, so no additional comments. Go, please proceed.
Okay, so D is related. Since the industry says part of the problem is their compensation is insufficient to attract needed tech staff, industry should be required to report any new postings for tech positions. That's to this council when they post them, and starting an average compensation and benefits for all tech staff for review by the council and possible additional recommendations, both for Connecticut and nationally. Yeah, so Joe's going to take that too.
All right, so 2 meetings ago, Diane had said it doesn't matter how much money we offer, we simply cannot find people willing to work. There's a sign-on bonus, retention bonus, and competitive wages. But if you go on to NSM's website right now, you'll see a job posting from October 28th, 2024 for a service technician in Niantic, Connecticut, with a pay rate of $19 per hour. It's only a few dollars above minimum wage and comparable to wages for someone flipping burgers at McDonald's. So why would anyone want that level of responsibility for minimal compensation? If you're able to offer a decent salary and share those positions with us, we as council members are willing to share any open positions with qualified candidates, but it cannot be for a few dollars over minimum wage. We understand, you're in a business where you're trying to make money, but there's no way of catching anybody's attention for that amount of money. We know what those technicians deal with on a daily basis, the job duties, the requirements, and that's just not a competitive wage, and you're not going to find technicians for that amount of money. at least not qualified ones. Any questions? I'd be willing to share that. I don't know if I could share my page or not, but I'll be willing to email that job posting to anybody who would like it.
Seeing no other questions, I have a question. I'm curious as to how non-Connecticut data it falls under our purview, or non-Connecticut information. We're supposed to be focusing on Connecticut.
This
and
is job posting in Niantic, Connecticut.
in Niantic. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you.
Yes, no, this is a job posting in Niantic for $19 an hour.
Right, but my question is that the recommendation is saying both for Connecticut and nationally. That
Oh, okay, all right.
I'm curious as to why outside state information postings from other states where cost of living, so on and so forth, are it's not apples to apples comparisons, and we're supposed to be focusing on the state of Connecticut, and I'm curious as to why a recommendation would be made for information outside of the state of Connecticut.
Just to have comparable data, and Sheldon's got his hand up on this,
But it's not comparable. It's not an apples to apples comparison would be my point.
Since other people help contribute to this, I know what other people are saying is that the reason you have the national data is precisely your point, Jonathan. That is to say, the $19 is shockingly low. It may be, we don't know, it may be that that's the rate that NSM offers for starting wages throughout the country. If it is, that's a real problem because, as you just said, the cost of living in Connecticut is very different. It's one of the highest cost of living states in the country. So if what NSM is doing in their posting for Niantic, Connecticut is using its standard around the country, then it's inherently problematic because of it's not apples and apples. It's much higher labor costs here, and that would be a factor. So that'd be the purpose. As I understand it from other people who wanted this thing in here, was to be able to make sense of what we're offering here by comparison. And I would also point out that you just talked about national data, Jonathan, with on the timeliness, and that was somehow relevant. So that's good for the news.
Okay, seeing no additional questions, please proceed.
So E is now this is what in all fairness Diane was talking about before, when it wasn't really a recommendation that was being discussed. This one is a recommendation that addresses the things she was talking about. E is industry should be required to work with OHA to regularly inform all wheelchair consumers about the new wheelchair repair law and the option of filing a complaint with OHA, including how to file a complaint in an annual mailing on its website, in all of its electronic newsletters, and in all other electronic communication with consumers. So this is, in supplementation of what DSS has already agreed to do in its newsletter. I believe Michelle is going to speak on this one.
If customers knew about the law and the Office Healthcare Advocate process and how to access it, there would not be only 9 complaints to OHA so far when the motion admits non-compliance 40% of the time. If people knew about the law, they would more likely file an OHA complaint about a delay than addressing it to the wheelchair techs. By educating consumers about the law, you will improve customer company relationships by providing a means for people to register any concerns with a dedicated party charged with receiving complaints. OHA.
Was everyone able to hear that okay? It was a little low on my end.
I heard it, fine.
It was quiet, but I think I got the gist.
Okay.
Are there any questions on that point?
So from the OHA side, I just I want to, I guess, say that we certainly will welcome working with industry on promoting our office, and that there are developments coming to make our website more accessible to folks to register complaints.
Okay, if there's no other comments, please proceed.
F, enforcement should be added to the new law so there are economic consequences for persistent, systemic non-compliance with timeliness requirements, including defining systemic non-compliance with the timely requirements in the law as an unfair trade practice under the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act. So this is a legal thing, so that's why I'm going to do this myself. As we all know, there's no enforcement of any of the timeliness requirements in the law at all. And we think that's a real problem. And so it is a little vague in saying enforcement through economic consequences, but the one specific thing, and this is done in other laws in Connecticut, is we have, I think people are familiar with the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act. It's been around for a long time, and it is a vehicle where it is alleged that, or a consumer believes that a company that supplies a product, has the product's defective, or the product has not been repaired, or there's some issue, or there's been misleading advertising about the product, claiming it does something when it doesn't. There's a whole range of things, unfair trade practices, right? But there's a general definition of what's an unfair trade practice, and then it could be a violation of some other statute. It could, but then that you get into a question of interpretation. Well, is that this? Is that what the legislature intended? So one solution to that problem of being vague is you define it as such. So in other words, the law could be amended to say that if a supplier of wheelchairs, not once, and we're not suggesting the one-offs, but if it's systemic, if the data continues to show significant non-compliance, that would be an unfair trade practice. And therefore, that law could be the basis for enforcement. So that's the concept here in this particular recommendation.
Okay, so seeing no other questions, I have some in terms of enforcement of economic consequences. By what mechanism or what entity would you suggest this occur, or the intent to leave that up to the legislature?
Well, if it was this last thing, let's just go with the Unfair Trade Practice Act, then I'll answer it more broadly. If you went with the Unfair Trade Practice Act, that's a court thing. So that would allow a consumer to bring a lawsuit in court over the noncompliance. And they could have a lawyer, there'd be attorney's fees if they were to win, that kind of thing. So you don't have to elaborate at all if that was going to be the solution or one of the solutions. For the rest, it could be anything. And when this law was passed, when PA 2458 was passed, a lot of things were discussed. There were several things, one of them which was, and I think it was in the original bill, if I'm not mistaken, that DSS would have financial sanctioning authority, at least in the case of Medicaid consumers. So, and there's a bunch of things that could be done. I mean, I don't know how other people feel, but I think it's okay for a recommendation to, in some cases, be a little open-ended and saying it's for the legislature to decide it. I don't think there's a problem with that, but maybe others disagree. And in any event, there's one specific thing regarding CUTPA here.
So I do have one more follow-up question, but I do see Ms. Skyers Thomas has her hand raised. Please proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to clarify that CUTPA currently is under consumer protection, is under that hub right now. So our agency would be moving forward with enforcement. So anything that we're considering right now, it would be under the confines of consumer protection. So I just wanted to put that out there for future discussion.
Thank you. So my second question then would be with respect to defining systemic noncompliance. Again, would that be something you would want this group to undertake, or would you, again, be the intent be leaving that up to the legislature?
I think we're thinking that probably for the legislature to do that. I mean, it could be as very specific as a percentage, like if more than I've seen laws like say like more than 2% noncompliance for a period of months or something like that. They could do that.
Okay, seeing no additional questions, please proceed.
Okay, the next one is this is something that's been of great concern to the consumer advocates, and it was discussed during the task force meetings, and that is that. And by the way, this kind of was the wording is a little off here. It says the timeliness requirements in PA 24-58 should be revised to provide for emergency repair services on weekends and holidays when a wheelchair is completely inoperable. I have to apologize. I made a mistake here. I was subscribed for this for what other people were asking for. And what they were really asking for is that there would be emergency repair services when a wheelchair is completely inoperable, including weekends and holidays. It wasn't just weekends and holidays because, for example, there's 515, the mechanism complete. Say it's a power wheelchair, it completely fails. It is now completely inoperable. It's 515 after business hours, so that was a concern. Anyway, Joe was going to be the one to speak on this.
Sorry, I had my audio off. Yeah, when an individual doesn't have a backup wheelchair, it needs to be emergency repair. It doesn't matter if it's a weekend or a holiday. Needs to be faster service. My most recent emergency that I had, and it's going to be hard to define. This is something that we're going to have to work as in order to define what exactly constitutes an emergency. But the most recent emergency that I had was I was in Hartford at 2 in the afternoon, middle of the week, and my power chair completely died. I got put into neutral and pushed back into my vehicle, which I drive my vehicle from my wheelchair with the use of hand controls. I was reclined back just enough where my hand controls were rubbing on my leg, and I could barely use my brakes. I was pushing for all I was worth in order to try and stop my vehicle, and couldn't do it. I was literally 15 minutes away from New Motion and an hour away from home. So I called them and talked to the remote tech who could not who could not diagnose what was going on. And I said, all right, if I'm just gonna go to New Motion and see if I can get a tech to at least look at it, maybe even move my legs so that I could at least use the brakes. And I was told you can go there, but there's no techs even there. So that right there constitutes an emergency. Here I am driving a vehicle, need to get home, and chair is completely dead, and I can't even get even with the option of going to their office, I still can't get an emergency service. So when there are true emergency situations, and it's a threat to our health, our well-being, there should be access to emergency services, and this includes, at minimum, the access to remote tech on weekends and holidays. It's been an ongoing issue. If you're dead in the water, you can't move. This can create a lot more issues. I know Daryl recently had a backrest break off on his chair, and he's completely inoperable there. He goes forward backwards. There's just so many ongoing additional health concerns that could be created if we don't have faster services, and those completely hard down. We don't have backup chairs and or loaner chairs, which is going to be the next topic that we're going to be discussing. And that's it for me.
Okay, are there any questions on that? Okay, seeing none, please proceed.
So the next one is, as Joe just indicated, about loaner chairs. A loaner chair should be required to be provided when a wheelchair is completely inoperable and the repair is expected to not be completed within 5 calendar days, with a waiver of liability likely being required by if they want to, by the supplier, because it's a loaner. It's not exactly right for the person. And so the person would have to sign something holding the supplier harmless for that. And Dave is going to speak on that.
I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory as far as what Sheldon just said. And when people don't have their own backup chair, or maybe their backup chair is broke as well. I mean, you can be literally stuck in your bed for a countless amount of days, not knowing when you're going to get a repair done. So this just makes sense, have an option of having this backup chair being provided. I mean, it's so self-explanatory. I mean, there's literally people on this group that have been stuck in bed because their chair's broke and they don't have a backup chair. So, I mean, this happens more often than it should because of delays. Any questions?
I just want to add on to that every time my chair has been broke for any amount of time, I've always been put on a call list to be notified if there were any loaner chairs available, because they never have any available if they're always being used. So there are loaner chairs right now. It's just there's not enough.
Just speaking as a consumer for a minute, I also this month or last month had an issue where my chair kept shutting down throughout the day, and I was stranded several times. And so there were a couple issues. One being that not having access to emergency service was a problem. Not having access to a loaner chair, we tried to fix the chair remotely through remote tech a few times, needing to use friends or family members to help, and that wasn't successful. And it really just took the tech to actually replace the cables or to tighten them, whatever he did. So it seemed to me that this problem that started at the beginning of the month and wasn't fixed till the end, we really could have fixed it at the beginning. So my point here, and also my share has gone down on Thanksgiving for the past 2 years. Hopefully we're good this year, but just knowing what that's like to have to wait for 4 days to get any answer, is the stress of it and being stuck in bed. It's just terrible. So my point being that even if we can't fix this or get this settled legislatively, I hope that we can open a conversation next year to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. And I have a couple of questions. And the first is, we've heard, if memory serves, we've heard stories of loaner chairs being lent out that were not physically appropriate for the individual, and that has caused issues for them. And so my question for, again, this goes back to details. My question for the advocates would be, how would you address that? Because these are, all of our wheelchairs are essentially fit to us, specifically as individuals. And so even if a loaner chair is available, it may not be one that is appropriate for you physically, which could lead to, and again, I'm not suggesting that laying in bed could not cause its own physical issues as well, but so could the loaner wheelchair. And so my question to the advocates would be, how would you suggest addressing that in your recommendation?
And that would be covered by the waiver of liability, because let's face it, I would rather sign a waiver of liability and be able to have the hope of being able to get around. And because I mean, if I'm gonna be laying in bed, I'm probably gonna end up with bed sores anyway. I might as well at least be mobile. And I mean, I'm sure every advocate on here has been in chairs that aren't appropriate for them in order to be able to at least try and continue living while they're waiting for their chairs. So if it doesn't have the proper side support, or if it's not, the exact measurements, anything is better than nothing.
I have something to add to that as well. I think the fact that these companies, they know our chairs, they know exactly what we're in, and they can look at what they have available, and they could figure out what's the closest match, and maybe they could adjust it as best they can and identify, and then if it's something that's they don't have, then they need to figure out a way to find something for them, or plan for that in the future.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Garland, I see you have your hand up, and then I have a question about this recommendation. I have a question for the industry. So go ahead, Ms. Garland.
Thank you. Mix, not miss. Thank you. My comment is in answer to your question about what to do about the chairs and having them fit to our bodies, and this is true. It is a concern, and let me turn my video on. It is a concern, and it is something that is legitimate to look into and to consider. Back in 2021, one of our, and by our, I mean the disabled community's greatest disability activists, Ingracia Figueroa, died after Delta Airlines broke her chair. She had a $30,000 custom fit power chair, from spinal cord injury. She had very custom positioning. Delta refused to give her a loaner. She ended up getting a cheap manual loaner that caused pressure sores, that caused further problems that resulted in her death less than a month later. These are concerns. But to what Mr. Morgana had to say, this isn't just anyone handing out our loaner chairs. These are people who have all of our information on file. It should be fairly easy to stipulate that if you have someone in a power chair that needs a power chair, you're not loaning out a manual chair. If you have someone that needs a sip and puff, you're not loaning out something that is not compatible with that. And also this speaks to the importance of timeliness in repairs, because yes, having a chair that does not suit your body can cause problems, but not if you don't leave someone in that chair for extended periods. So as long as we can address this in a timely manner, being able to continue to live our lives is far more important and far more good for our health than being trapped in bed or wherever we are. Thank you so much.
I would, one other thing is kind of obvious, but you know, the consumer doesn't have to accept the loaner chair. It's not a mandate. You shall take this thing. If they really think it's not going to be appropriate for them, of course, you know, they would have the right to refuse.
No, but the story that was just shared is exactly one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of the loaner chairs not being appropriate for the individuals physically and what that could potentially lead to. And that's why I wanted to raise the question here. My question for the industry, Mr. Ascott, just given what the recommendation, obviously the indication is that there is a shortage of that there are loaner chairs, but there is a shortage of that. And I guess, you know, again, without a level of detail, what would it take on the industry side, you know, to make more loaner chairs available? I mean, would you
would have to almost have a duplicate of every chair that we sold. Let's be realistic. Mm-hmm. Because chances are, if you're going to come to us for a loaner chair and you are in a group 3 with a custom seater back, we're not going to have that same custom seating back to give you, nor will we want to, for those various reasons that were just shared. Now, we will, when we do have something, we'll say I have this group 3, it's a standard back on this. I don't have, I have maybe a different cushion. We ask, well, do you want to use that while we're repairing? And it's up to consumer. But there's very often, if someone has something on their chair that's specific to them, or if there's extra components that are on it that they need to make them mobile or whatever, and we don't have it in stock, we're not going to give it to you, because to that point, we do have your setups. We do know what you have. And that's the challenge that we ran into. And now we're still trying to stock up on more, and that supply chain has improved at the end of the year of last year. And we're starting to try to get some more of those that we have to purchase in with those configurations. Are we going to have one for every single person that calls? No. And that's what it's going to take. We have to purchase all of those. So for every chair that goes out, especially for those group 3 chairs that we're speaking to that are the harder ones to fit, that's when you run into that problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, seeing no additional questions, please proceed.
One other thing I thought of, which is that when somebody getting a new chair and they have their old chair, and a lot of people can't keep the old chair physically. I mean, the apartment, you know, is too small. I'm just thinking out loud here. I wonder if the supplier could take the wheelchair instead of it being disposed of. I don't even know where they go. Since the consumer can't keep it, that chair is a backup. If it were to go to NSM and NSM has it, it could be used as a loaner in general, but also for the very person it came from. I'm just sort of thinking out loud about a possibility here that might be helpful. Anyway, the next one, Daryl's not back. Daryl's not back. So let's skip that if we can. That was I. Hopefully Daryl, because there's the other 2 of the 3 are for Daryl. But the next one, J, is not for Daryl. Keeping the exception to the 10 business day deadline in the law for waiting for parts, where parts really are waiting for delivery. So the proposal is not to take out that exception that you're waiting for the parts, but dealers should be required to either have parts in stock or have a 1-day option for all parts once available from the manufacturer. In other words, there can be back orders. There can be things where it's just not the manufacturer doesn't have it on hand, and so that would continue to be an exception. But the part that is within control of the supplier is that it could have parts in stock. And I know it's discussed at length in the task force meetings, how there's so many parts, it's hard to do that and all that. But it's either that or having overnight delivery if the manufacturer themselves has it in stock. So that's what this proposal is. Farah, you speak on this?
Me again. Thank you. Yes, this is more or less what Sheldon, this is exactly to help hit those deadlines and to keep things from being just dragged out endlessly, or what can seem like endlessly from our perspective as a consumer, and I'm sure can seem like endlessly from the industry standpoint as well. A requirement for parts to be in stock, and with the understanding that it is impossible to keep everything in stock, a requirement for 1-day shipping for things that are not in stock. I've worked in the healthcare field for over 15 years now. I've done medical billing for over 10. I'm extremely familiar with how these sorts of things work. And overnight shipping in the healthcare field for necessary products is standard. So this seems like a no-brainer and kind of a surprise that it's not already being done. So yeah, no, I think this is a pretty easy thing. Again, it's a small added expense, but again, in the healthcare field, this is par for the course. So thank you. Questions? All right.
So seeing no questions, and again, I'm asking just because the questions came up, Mr. Ascott, maybe you're saving these for your comments later, but again, I would ask, what exactly would this take on the part of the industry, and also where would all these parts be stored is a question I would have.
Exactly. That is part of the questions that we would have to figure out: storage and capacity in 1-day shipping, if that manufacturer even has that ability to do that for us and have that set up, because they are, somewhere overseas that we get these things from. And some of that, so to that part, whether it's back ordered or not, then we're going to have to prove that probably that part was ordered and requested overnight. If we didn't get it, another tracking thing probably is going to be asked, especially if you guys are looking for penalty language to go in here. So it depends. Everything comes, typically, like I shared earlier in the meetings, part of the purchase orders that we're putting in, we saw a daytime that just because how the manufacturers function across the nation in general, we're waiting for quotes to come back. We're doing exception process with them for the state of Connecticut to try to get this done faster because of this bill. We're making them change their industry practices, but that's only in one area. That's something that's going to be something that's out of our control, or we're having meetings with manufacturers, but let's face it, one state versus 50 of how they're doing the business is going to take a little bit of time to get them to change their practices with us and agree who's paying for that overnight shipment cost. Is it on us? Is it on them? Whatever it may be. Those are negotiations that have to hide. That's not in this purview of this group, that we would have to do with their businesses. So I can't necessarily answer that fully without having all the people that are involved in that to be able to answer that question completely. But that's top of mind right off the bat.
Understood. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. Seeing no additional questions, please proceed.
Diane, could I ask a question, a follow-up though? Are you saying that some of the manufacturers that have in stock, they're not physically in the United States? That is to say, the manufacturer is really overseas?
Some of
Not
them,
that
like remember, Perm Bill's overseas. So some of their stuff stateside, some might not be, depending on what it is on the chair. Let's say it's a specialized component that's no longer manufactured per se or something. We run into this, like things change every 5-6 years. Configuration of chairs change, right? So let's say there's a part that the person needs for their chair that's no longer technically manufactured, but we're going to have to get it configured and made, right? That might be something that we can't get overnighted. It might be something that comes up. It depends what it is, Sheldon, because I can't answer fully for each of that. So don't put me on the stand, start asking me a bunch of what part, what piece. I would have to go back and look at those. But keep in mind, we do have manufacturers that some are stateside with their stuff. There might be something that has to come from overseas, whatever it is. We don't know.
Right.
So without answering that fully with that right in front of me, I would have to be able to look at every single component piece that we're using between all the 6 manufacturers that we work with for all the chair components.
And I should have said like early on that, that consumer advocates are willing, we said last time, but maybe some of these recommendations should be revised somewhat based upon the discussion. So perhaps this is what I don't know. But I guess I wanted to be clear that the recommendation here as it's written is that if you're waiting for something to be put together, that absolutely is an exception. It was only if the manufacturer has it now, they have it now. And it's just a question of getting it from manufacturer to here. And that's why I was asking, why are some of these manufacturers where
and we're already doing that. We're credit accepting everything right now, Sheldon. And we said that before in the previous meetings. We're doing that now to get all that stuff. We're re-inventorying everything out. So I mean, that's, to put it in legislative language seems to me as a waste when you already have part of the bill addressing part of those components, and we're already doing it to meet timelines. So again, it just, I'll reserve my points to the end when you guys are done going. Even though, please note, guys, I do have a hard stop at 12:30. So I'm hoping we can get through this and I can do my rebuttals back.
Okay, quickly.
Daryl's in the waiting room. Sorry to interrupt. Daryl's in the waiting room.
Oh, good timing. I don't see him yet. There he is. Hey, Daryl. Okay, so the last two we saved for you. The first one is this. The statute should be amended to require consumers to receive from the wheelchair dealer, as they do in Massachusetts, all timeline data related to their repair request necessary to determine if a violation of the law has occurred, both electronically during and after the repair process and in paper at the time of completing the repair. Did we lose him?
Nope, I'm here.
Oh,
yeah, thanks,
sorry.
Sheldon.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm here. Sorry, guys, that I wasn't here in between. But yeah, just as Sheldon mentioned, this seems to be one of the key points. I do really like how like the My NSM order tracking site is up there. That does help track these and keep them a little bit more transparent. But I do think we need to have that listed in the legislative process there. As well as I do think one of the key points of this is have the date of contact from the consumer be listed specifically on there. I was recently looking at the tracking site too as well on my personal order, and the part where preparing your order was listed, and it has everything where the scheduled evaluation date, the eval date, and all the product design as step 1 was completed on November 11th. A key information here that I didn't see on the site was that when I reached out for the service, it was November 4th. So that's 7 days right there for the step 1. So I do think there needs to be a little bit more transparency in there.
Okay, seeing no additional questions, please proceed so that we can give Ms. Rascott the time that she needs. Thank you.
All right, and the very last one was to ensure quality service calls, all service calls, chats, and remote evaluations should be required to include a follow-up email to the consumer with a summary of the call, CCing the local dealer contact with links for the consumer to request a response from a local escalation team. And that's also Carol.
Yeah, so I do think, sometimes there's been like a lot of inconsistencies, with many different consumers that I talk to, just from personal friends, colleagues, and it's just, there seems to be some inconsistency. So I definitely think that documentation, making sure, we're on top of that, and to just ensure, that everything's getting handled, appropriately, and, timeliness too as well. I do think sometimes this could help too. A lot of times there's orders that are, ordered a different part or a different, oh, well, we ordered the 4x1 wheel. We needed the 5x1, like, oh, there was just like some sort of miscommunication or something. Because some of these parts are very, very similar. One might be a fixed backrest or one might be, a folding backrest. So there's different little components to just ensure. And I think that could cut down on, wherever the error might be. And it's also a way for us to just really, understand what was discussed on that call. I do know there is the information on that mynsmorder.com, which is great because you can access that. But if there is, sort of a tally of everything that we have related to service calls, related to the evaluations, related to what was recommended, in the summary of those, transcriptions or whatever it was, to just make sure we're hitting on those key points.
Okay, thank you. Given the time constraint, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ms. Rascott for her comments.
Thank you. I just put a note to my other persons to ask them to push it back 15 minutes so I can answer these things.
Okay.
So I would like to go through the very top, if I may, for each thing that's put on the legislative and just make some comments. My question I have, though, is do we need to put industry response to the consumers' recommendations? Is that being requested?
That will be requested in the form that we will send out after next week's meeting. Very
good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Produce monthly compliance for data, and the first couple of points on here, I don't see the need for it to be a legislative mandate. We're doing it already. We'll continue to keep doing it. We will share our data points and work in concert with this, right? If the legislature's asking for this, we're not going to not comply. But I don't see the need for the mandates in the first 3 points on this. The one question that was brought up on our staffing point, Joe, you put in there, but 19 an hour, that should not be that. That's not correct. So I thank you for bringing that one up because that is not what the base rate for a new entry with no experience is supposed to be posted at. So I already put an email in to look into that posting that you said was at 19 an hour. It shouldn't be that. It should be no less than 21 for an entry level person with no experience. But regardless of that, because we did do 2 to 3 months ago and at the beginning of the year, $2 to $3 base increases on those. Plus, depending on the level of experience, it goes up to a higher. So, one, thank you for sharing that, but we'll update that too. For the compensation for that, I've got a little bone of contention with D though in general, because we got to be able to run our businesses and also understand how our reimbursement models and everything works. I mean, I don't know why that has to be mandated. Do you do that for any other business out there in the nation, right? In the state? I would like to know that. Industry should be required to work with OHA to regular inform wheelchair consumers, a law. We are already notifying people, as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour. The other thing that needs to be noted for this team, for us as a company, I don't know if any other ones in the state, we're JACO certified. So when we get JACO certification, we have to track all our complaints and what type of complaints, and we have reports on that. And including all our private insurance plans, we have complaint monitoring we have to report. We do that already. And if the state comes to us, if Medicaid, if Jeannie's office comes and says we have a complaint, someone filed a complaint on something, they report to us and we have to report those and we keep those and we catalog all those. I don't know if everybody's aware of that. Because that's compliance things that we have to follow already as an industry. Enforcement should add new law where there's economic consequences for this under unfair. Now, I have a question and clarification. Is that is that under medical also? Or is that consumer under the typical bills that have been out there historically for consumer items that are not medical? I have a clarification on that. Timelines for emergency repairs, etc. on that. We know we brought that up before, coverage. I don't know what we're going to do because we're looking at doing expanded hours. But again, it's a matter of, we got to be reimbursed for all this stuff too, guys. I mean, we're doing all this out of pocket already with all the stuff that we talked about and have been. Loaner chairs, kind of to the point that was brought up earlier. We try to get all those as much as we can. But that would mean we'd be buying every single one a duplicate for everyone that we go out. And again, we don't have warehouse capacity to store 50 to 60 additional chairs or configurations. Thank you for the posting. That's going to be a challenge on that. And again, we're looking at some other programs that are out there around some other states that we would like to bring. We'll put that as part of our proposals next week from the industry side. I'll be honest with you, I'll give you a heads up. Everything that the industry is going to bring to the tables was things that were already discussed in the task force. Our comments haven't changed and aren't going to change on what we want to see happening. Statute to amend consumer receipt wheelchair dealers in the timeline that is necessary. I got to understand why this needs to be a statute if it needs to be, if you're just asking for, the one thing I can say for tracking, like when we open up an order, when you call in first, like the date you just gave, I think Daryl, when you said you open it up, like we have on delivery tickets that we do in some states, we're doing in another next door. You'll get on your delivery ticket the date that the order was open at the top of it. To that point, like you brought up, like you said, it was on the 4th you called, but then when you looked on my NSM, it was the 11th when the next steps were put through. But we have all that tracking, and that's part of the tracking that we're doing right now for this bill too. Like date called, who called, when was it, our notes that are on those. And I think Numo is doing the same thing, but they got more IT bills that they're doing. And I shared some of this with the co-chairs that we can bring up and we can talk about next week, and our recommendations of what we've done. And so those are some of the things I want to kind of go to for those chats and flows. But I'll be honest with you, I'm going to have a real hard time as a business if we're going in the right direction and adding penalty language on top of it. It's a general statement to the group. What incentive is there for me to continue to expand and try to do more coverage, add more area, when I keep putting myself at higher risk of lawsuits or penalties or etc.? You're not going to help the industry want to come into this workspace or get more people to come into this workspace or expand the current space that we're doing if all you're looking to is to penalize who are doing it and trying to do it in mandate. I really question the logic of that. And I understand why. I understand. Please keep in mind, I understand if you're sitting in a chair too long, but there's other things that I said at the beginning, that policy changes to make it better for our disabled clientele to have a better work-life balance and be able to do things that haven't been addressed and haven't been in place forever. And you're just looking for those industry members that are there to do the services, to pick up the check for all of it and become a AAA road service at the drop of a hat. And the reality is we don't have the bandwidth to do that right now. But there's bandwidths that we're looking for to help with some of those solutions so people are not stuck at home and you're not waiting 28 days to get a repair and you can't go to work. We understand that fully. But some of that you're asking before this bill even gone live, and that's one of my questions I have for the group. Why are you asking for legislative change when the second half of the bill hasn't even been enacted yet? And we don't know how that's gone out. My concern, guys, is I have yet to receive from a single one of my insurance plans, the private insurance, that they recognize the removal of the prior auth and RXs for the repairs yet. And normally by now, 60 days out to 30 days out from when something gets changed in a policy, we get notified from the insurance plan. I have yet to receive a single one that they enacted this part of the bill. And that's a concern. So you guys are jumping the gun on something, adding more language, more punitive stuff before we even have the bill fully enacted. And my ask is why? And we will respond back to all this. And like I said, what you're going to see from us next week is all the things that were brought up in the task force to begin with as recommendations. But I will state fully, I have issue with some of these things when we've been complying above and beyond it, what we don't know the full interpretation of the bill is yet. And you're already going to the point of penalization before we even get to that point. And I thought the point of all this was we have improving the process of this. We have been improving the process of it. Is you got it going in the right direction. If you start adding punitive language and all these other things, I don't necessarily say incentivized, but what is the partnership here? If we're heading in the right direction, we're willing to have conversations. And I'll be honest with you guys, This committee, since the beginning, has not been a conversation. It has been a dictation. And no offense, Sheldon, you've been running the show since day one. And I am only one voice here. And we did have Gary invited as a guest. And I'm only one inviting one member to vote. And I know how this is going to go. But I just want this committee to think about that. Because if we really want to have conversations, let's have conversations. Let's share some of the information. But if information is going to be shared and taken out of this committee and used as a tool for whatever public letters you want to put out, whatever mandates you're trying to do, and at the end of the day, if your intent is just to shut us down and sue us, then state that up front, because then we need to make business decisions. And I really feel that this has not been what I thought the legislative intent was. And how the bill came out, I was kind of surprised. To the point that people said the legislators all agree and think this is one direction. I have bone of contention with that, and we can't go there because it's done. And so that's my peace of mind on this, my statement to this. We will come back next week with our recommendations and our asks to be considered, but we don't expect it to happen because this bill is not fully rolled out yet. And I thought this part was, where are we going? Is it going in the right direction? And if it's not, why isn't it? And what do we need to do? And if it really was us as an industry blatantly not trying to do the right thing to what the intent of this bill is, I can see you guys throwing up and going to send us to wolves. But at this point in time, that has not been what's been shared in this meetings.
Thank you, Ms. Raspet. McStarlin, you have your hand.
Thank you. I would just like to chime in briefly, and as an advocate activist, as a chair user, and as someone who's been to all of these meetings, and just these have been meetings. They have had their contentious moments. It's been no one's show in particular. It has been two people's show in particular, and I think both of you need to take some responsibility here. Okay? Second of all, this is not a place for conversation, and I don't know where that idea came up. This is a place where we have been appointed legislatively to review and enforce or ensure that a law is being appropriately enforced and make recommendations moving forward to ensure that that is happening and that it is happening fairly to the industry, sure, but as the law is read, primarily for the people that are affected by it. And the people affected by it are the wheelchair users, are the consumers. The law is written to protect us, not to protect the industry. The industry is a big consideration. That is why there is a seat at the table here. We are all in this together and we are all working together on this. But the financial burdens of a multi-million billion-dollar company, what is it, between $100 and $150 million post-tax profit estimated last year, is not really much of a front row concern for people who are unable to go to work, unable to spend time with their families, unable to get out of bed, who are stranded, who are stuck in their cars, unable to drive safely. It is a concern, of course. The primary concern here is making sure that wheelchair users are cared for, are respected, are provided for by their healthcare providers. If profit is the only bottom line here, you need to get out of the healthcare industry somewhere else to work respectfully. This is a healthcare industry you are in. So we need to focus on healthcare and caring for your patients. So we have all been working together on this. And I would also like to mention that the bringing in of Gary as a guest was in fact the recommendation of the advocates, because we thought that there needed to be more voice and more representation from the industry. We wanted to hear directly. So if we can all please behave like adults, look at the data, interpret the bill the way it is written instead of playing bananas games, I think that we will all have a much better and more professional experience here. Thank you very much. And I do apologize for my lack of professionalism in this frustration. Thank you.
Mr. Carson, I see that you're on the call. Is that Ms. Rascott raised that she had not heard from the insurance companies yet with respect to the change in the law. I was just curious if you are able to comment on that at all. And maybe you're not. It just the question came to mind.
Yeah, no, that's a valid question. So we generally do not receive copies of those type of notifications from insurance companies. I can ask, and we could reach out to the fully insured insurers that we license and see if they have something to say about that. So if that'd be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Taubman.
Yeah, I just want to thank Diane for giving her perspective on all this and Farah's response. Just a couple of these. There was a question you actually asked, which was about CUTPA, and CUTPA is kind of neutral about the kind of item service. It could be medical, it could be non-medical. So it would just basically be applying to these particular medical items as it would anything else as a toaster. The thing about waiting until January 1st, the only thing that's going to additional thing is that it's only a minority of folks who are in fully insured plans and where the bar on prior authorization for repairs goes into effect. It's actually, I think, 16% of the population. So maybe Jim knows better, but so it's a relatively small piece of it, and they've already been removed. All those requirements for prior auth have already been removed as of July 1st, as you know, in Medicaid, which is the majority of the folks we're talking about, and we're still getting complaints for the Medicaid folks. So, you know, I'm not sure how big a deal that is. Certainly it's really great, January 1st. And by the way, we want to help. If you're really hearing that the insurers are not complying with the law, we'll step up to the plate on that. But the last thing I want to say is that to your point about how, you know, you're trying, and then you're going to clobber us with proposing that the law be changed to have economic penalties. Remember, the proposal, as I explained, and I was asked about this by Jonathan, is that there would, of course, be some recognition that 100% compliance is what the law says, but, you know, perhaps it could specify some threshold allowing for some slippage. And then the other thing related to this, honestly, I'm sorry, Gary's not here right now, but the reality is that your company, Diane, has about the same number of employees, roughly, as reported. We need uniform reporting. We all agreed on that, on the number of techs, but roughly the same number of employees as New Motion. You have a much smaller percentage of share of the population. So, you know, it's not surprising that you're at 96% perhaps, and they're at 60%. So there may be a difference between the companies, and it may be that the threshold for any kind of compliance action would be one which you're actually able to meet, whereas New Motion won't, because it doesn't have nearly enough text just by those ratios. I think that's really looking forward. The idea is that it would apply to both companies or any other company to be fair that way. Thanks.
And comment, the fully insured market is approximately 26%. So you got the 6 right. You're close. Yeah.
I thought that's what Susan Halpin had said last time. I apologize.
So Ms. Rascott put a question or a comment in the chat. Did you want to?
Yeah, because ours, for my, you know, like I have UHC, Cigna, Aetna, you know, 40% of our clients are under the private insurance first primary. So I'm a little confused why you're saying only 26%, and the other 60% is what I have as Medicare, Medicaid. And I have yet to see any of those private insurances send a notification. So that's my concern. And if that's the case, I need to understand that, because they have not sent any notifications to us. We always get notified when policy changes come in. And there's a 60 to 30-day requirement from all of them, and we have yet to receive them.
I may be able to speak to the difference in percentages a little bit, which is that what Mr. Carson was referring to is what are called the fully insured plans that are regulated by the state of Connecticut, where your total, what you're calling insurance, likely includes the ERISA plans, the employer self-funded plans, which are not regulated by the state of Connecticut. So this legislation removing prior authorization would not be able to get that prior authorization away from the ERISA plans.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense then. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no, are there any other additional comments or questions at this time? Okay, it sounds like the advocates may have a little bit of work to do in terms of making some adjustments to their recommendations. Next week, we will hear the recommendations from the industry, and we will move forward. We will proceed from there. If there's nothing else, if there is a motion to adjourn.
I had something to add. There might be scheduling conflicts with multiple people next week, and I don't know if that may be discussed as far as our next meeting, and if there's a discussion to be had as far as maybe changing the date or time of next week's meeting.
We would need to make that decision very, very quickly. We'll look to send an email out by the end of the day.
Okay, thank you, because we have multiple people that I'm aware of that are not going to be available next week, and I think it would be better if we reschedule, in my opinion.
Okay, we'll talk here, and we'll send an email out.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Taubman.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as David. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I'm glad that you can adjust that. Thanks.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, we will see you at the next meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.